Okay, so we're going to start on exercise 123, and it looks like all of you are coming right along on your plans, and I would like to compliment you on your quality of floor plans. This is by far the best set of floor plans that I've had in doing this assignment. So you guys seem to be the most conscientious and actually really pushing the boundaries, and I appreciate that very much. I think you'll end up with a much better product because of that. So today we're going to depart a little bit from what we've been doing in terms of the pure drawing in AutoCAD, and I'm going to spend some time talking about a concept called Paperspace. And I think in a lot of the AutoCAD classes that you may take, whether they're here or elsewhere, the concept of Paperspace really gets glossed over, and you might spend a little bit of time on it, but for the most part you concentrate on learning to draw and learning the various techniques and ultimately dimensioning and that sort of thing. And I think that Paperspace is really one of the more critical places for you to learn, or things for you to learn in AutoCAD. And so I want to spend today really talking about what Paperspace is and how it works and why it's valuable in the world of architecture. And so what we've been modeling in thus far with the black background and the white lines is something that's called Modelspace. And the idea of Modelspace is that whatever you draw is in full scale. So if a wall is 6 inches thick, you draw the 6 inches. If a wall is 20 feet long, you draw it as 20 feet. And so everything is in full scale. And that's denoted because we have the black background, and that's something that we see. If we look in the lower left corner here, you see there's a little tab, and it's behind me, so it's impossible for you to see on the screen. But there's a tab that says Model, and that model is Modelspace, and that's what we're currently drawing in. If we switch into the next tab over, which is probably called Layout 1, on your screen, that's the default, you see that the background changes to be white, and we get what looks like a sheet of paper. Rather than an infinite black field to draw on, we have this sheet of paper. And so this then represents what is going to be ultimately printed or plotted or would go on a poster board or something like that. And so we've switched from the world of full-scale drawing into a world where we're going to concentrate on scaling, getting appropriate scales, and making it fit on a particular piece of paper. And so in the world of Paperspace, we have our default layout. We could rename this layout to be something other than Layout 1. For the scope of what we're doing in the class, there's no reason it can't stay named Layout 1. But if I right-click on Layout 1, I get this little pop-up menu, and from the list about halfway down is something called Page Setup Manager. That's what we want to click on. And this then brings up the Page Setup Manager dialog box. And we see under here we have something called Layout 1. And over on the right side there's a button for Modify. And if we click on Modify, we will get the page setup for Layout 1. So it says Page Setup-Layout 1. And this looks an awful lot like what the printing setup looks like. When you go to plot, you've been doing this. It looks a lot like that because essentially what we're doing is we're setting everything up as if we were going to print it, but we're not actually going to print it. And this is going to be a print preview, so to speak, of what it is that we're going to see. So I'm going to go ahead and under the printer and plotter name, I'm going to click the DWG to PDF.PC3. Generally speaking, when we get to this stage, we're not going to be printing JPEGs anymore, which is what you have been printing. We're instead going to be publishing PDF documents, because a PDF will let us then go on any computer. You could email it to somebody, they could open it, but we could also take it anywhere and we could plot it anywhere. We could give it to a print shop and they could do a plot of it. So it's a very flexible format and file. So we're going to choose DWG to PDF. You will also find that in making a PDF, we can open it natively in Illustrator and have actual lines that we can work with. So it ends up being very valuable as a format. So we're going to go DWG to PDF. And then under paper size, we would pick what size paper we would be printing on. And so I'm going to pick an ArcD 24 by 36 sheet, which is what I'm going to ask you guys to do for your assignment 105s. Okay? You could also customize and create a different size page if you were trying to, say, plot a big poster for your final presentation in 220 or something. But for what we're doing, we're going to stick with an ArcD, which is a standard 24 by 36 sheet. Both the plotters in this room will print 24 by 36s, so that's ultimately what we're going for. So I'm going to pick ArcD, and you see that my paper size changes to 24 by 36. What to plot should be set at layout, because that is what we want to see. And under plot scale, we're going to choose a scale of 1 to 1. And the reason we're going to pick 1 to 1 is we want this white page to represent exactly what our piece of paper is going to look like. Okay? So we'll deal with scaling your drawing separately, and we're going to do that in Viewports, and I'll get to that. But for right now, in the page setup, we're going to leave scale as 1 to 1. Under the plot style pen table, I pick AutoCAD.ctb as the default. Essentially, that matches what you see on the screen, which is fine. We'll leave it as that. And then down here under quality, you could switch to maximum if you wanted. It really doesn't make any difference, but you can do it. And the rest of these checkboxes, defaults, are fine. Generally speaking, your drawing orientation is going to be set up as landscape, which is typically what a 24 by 36 sheet would be. So we don't need to change anything. Notice that the page here is 24 by 36 long. Right? Down here, we're plotting in landscape ultimately, so it'll rotate. It depends on the plotter. Generally speaking, the one on this row only has 24 wide. So when you print 24 by 36, it'll print the long direction. The one on the left over there has 36 wide, so it'll print 24 by 36 in the landscape orientation. The plotter is going to determine that. But if we pick the 24 by 36 sheet in landscape mode, the plotters will adjust for us. So now that I'm completely done with all of that, I'll go ahead and say OK. And we'll see that my page, when I said OK, my page changed in size. Before I had 8.5 by 11. Now I have 24 by 36. Okay? I could just go ahead and say close at this point. And so now what I'm seeing in the Layout 1 tab is I'm seeing a sheet of paper that's 36 inches across and 24 inches down. Okay? I also see a viewport that's sitting here. And so by default, we have a viewport, right, that's been created for us. It's very, very difficult to see my actual plans, so we need to adjust some things relating to this particular viewport. So the first thing that I'll do is I want to point out that if you double-click inside a viewport, you can zoom in and zoom out inside of that viewport. Okay? Double-click to get outside of it. Okay? The one thing that I'll caution you against is if you zoom in, and you're seeing only the inside of your viewport, and you double-click to zoom in and zoom out, you have no place to double-click to get out of your viewport. So you can get stuck. Does that make sense? So in this case, I'm going to hit Escape. Well, it's not even going to let me. I'll Control-Z to back out and see if I can get out. There you go. So you want to make sure that you can see your entire viewport, and I'm actually going to show you a trick relating to this so that you don't catch yourself later on. But for right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the viewport itself, and I'm going to open up my properties window. And so by default, it's not showing, and so I'm going to go ahead and type in properties. And that brings up this little floating properties window on the left side here. For some of you, it'll end up being docked on one side or the other. If you use it frequently, you may keep it docked. You can do that by dragging it over to one side, and it will then nest in and stay there for you. It's really up to you. It's a matter of preference as to whether you'd prefer to have it just kind of floating in space or docked on one side. And that's part of why in the world of AutoCAD, when you guys open it, every time AutoCAD looks different because everybody has their different customizations that they tend to do. For right now, I'll leave it floating here. And with the viewport selected, we can come down here and under the miscellaneous category, right, we can look right here under standard scale, and it currently says custom. Okay? However, if I click where it says custom, you'll see that there are a variety of scales available to me, all the way up to 1/4 inch equals a foot. Actually, they go much higher than that, right? But I can kind of scroll, and as I go through, so at a 1/16 inch equals a foot, that's the size of my floor plan. As I go up 3/32, an eighth, you see how my plan is getting bigger, right? I'm going to select 1/4 inch equals a foot. Now, when I've done that, you see that it's actually gone beyond what I can see of my floor plan. So I'm going to use the little grips. I'll click on each square, and I'll make my viewport a little bit bigger so that I can see all of my floor plan. There it is. And maybe I'll leave a little bit of my contours in, something like that. Oops. There we go. And I'm going to Z enter, E for extents. Oops, excuse me. Zoom, A for all, so I can see the whole page again. And now I can take this viewport and I can move it using the Move tool right here over onto my page. Okay, so this object is now printed, or is going to print at 1/4 inch equals a foot, right, to scale, on this 24 by 36 inch sheet. Okay, so I've set up a viewport that is a particular scale, and it's now going to translate when I go to print. So that's already set up for me. Now, I have, if I switch into Modelspace, I have each of my elevations drawn. Right? I embellished a few of these a little bit. I have each of them drawn, but they're folded out, as we discussed. Right? I would like to include those elevations, right, on my layout, but I'm going to do this using a separate viewport. Okay? And so I have a couple options. One, I could take this one viewport, and I could copy it, and I could create a second viewport here. And then I could double-click to get inside it, and then use the pan tool, or the middle mouse button. And I could move around. Oops, the mouse is sticking here. I could move to see my elevation. And notice that this viewport is still, if we look, oops, let me double-click to get out of it, and then select it. This viewport is still 1/4 inch equals a foot, which is what I want. And let me go ahead and tighten this up a little bit as a viewport. That. And then I can move it, be over on my page somewhere. Okay? Now, obviously, there's some things that need cleaning up. I've got a contour line that's running through my elevation. We'll get to that kind of cleanup. I also have some overlap here, so maybe this needs to get a little bit smaller. Something like that. Okay? So I now have this view set up. It is the same scale. There is also a View tab across the top here. And inside of this View tab, and I never do it this way, there should be the ability to create a new viewport, which of course it's not showing me where it would be. Maybe it's under Layout. Layout tab. Sorry. Wrong tab. It's not View. It's Layout. I can create a new rectangular viewport, like that, and it gives me just a scaled to fit version. So once again, I'm going to have to change the scale of this particular piece. So sometimes it's easier to click and zoom in on the object you want. That's what I want. And then I'll select the viewport, and again, come over here to standard scale, and we'll switch to 1/4 inch equals a foot. So we're in the correct scale. Now, we've got a problem. In this case, we have a view, but it's 90 degrees to the direction that I want. Okay? Now, in the handout, under Part 3, I have you use a tool called MV Setup. Truth is that AutoCAD improved something in 2016. Things have changed. No surprise. I didn't discover this until this morning. Otherwise, I would have updated the handout, right? We don't have to use MV Setup anymore, MV Setup. We can just type Rotate, or go to our Home tool, our Home ribbon, select Rotate, and we can take this object. Let me turn on ortho here for a second. And I can rotate it over to the side. Right? So even though I drew this object sideways in Modelspace, when it comes to, there it is, sideways, when it comes to the layout view, I can correct it and I can have it oriented in the correct manner. So that's one of the really good, powerful things about viewports, is that we can customize and we can choose, right, which rotation this particular piece is going to be. So I've now created the second view, or the second elevation. So let me go ahead and move this. Like that. Now, I can come back to my Layout tab. I can come back to Rectangular. I can create another viewport. Again, I'll double-click and zoom in. This time, I need this view. So I'll double-click to come out, select my object, and adjust my standard scale to be 1/4 inch equals a foot. There it is. And we'll go ahead and rotate again. And there it is in its correct orientation. So we can go ahead and move this over. Like that. And I'll do it one more time. So one more rectangular viewport. Right here. Double-click to zoom in a little bit. The zoom in just helps you orient your object and be right on the kind of the center of your object. So there it is. I'll double-click. select it, change my standard scale to 1/4 inch equals a foot, and then we'll go ahead and rotate this. There it is. And I'm just using the grips to adjust the size of this viewport a little bit. There we go. And we'll move it so that it's up here and there. So I now have a layout where I have my floor plan and I have all 4 of my elevation views that are oriented correctly. So even though I drew them upside down and folded out, they're now correct when I'm looking at it on my layout view. So a couple more things. Remember I talked about the fact that if I were to double click on one of these and then zoom in, right, this still zooms. Well, that would destroy the 1/4 inch equals a foot scale. I'd have to double click, come back, and reset it to be a 1/4 inch equals a foot, which is a little bit challenging, okay, or a little bit annoying. So what I'm going to do, now that I have the scales set and I can see all of my objects inside of these various scales, I'm going to go ahead and select all of the viewports, and then over here on the right side, the third object down is display locked, and it's currently set to no. If I click on it, I can say display locked set to yes, and once it's locked, now the scale can't change. So if I were to double click inside of a view and I zoom in, see how the scale doesn't change? Right? So once you get these set up and once you get the scale set the way you want it, make sure you select the viewports and lock the viewports. Okay? Essentially by making them this display locked to yes. Okay? Now we can't adjust the scale at all, which is exactly what we want. The other thing that'll happen is if I go to actually print this, go to a preview, right? We get these boxes around each of my views, which is less than ideal. Okay? So I'm going to take this one step further, and I'm going to go back to my layers, and I should already have either a guides layer or a no print layer. I'm going to create one more, and I'm going to call this no print. I'll change the color to be green. That's habit for me, is to keep it green. Oops, I didn't want this to change. Okay, so I'm going to take no print. It's green, and I'm going to make sure it has the little no print icon next to it, which is perfect. And I'm going to take all of my viewports, and I'm going to put them on that no print layer. Now, it seems a little counterintuitive because you would think then that the viewports wouldn't print at all. The only part that doesn't print is the border when you do this. So if I went back to plot and I looked at preview, I now don't have the borders around. Okay? We still have a few problems, though, because I have this contour line that's running through each of my elevations. So this is the other powerful thing about viewports, is that I can choose which layers are on or which layers are off in any particular viewport. So I can turn certain layers on, I can turn certain layers off, and they will be specific only to this viewport. So let's look here at the south elevation. If I were to double-click to get inside of the south elevation view, I can now come up to my layer drop-downs, and I can turn off the topography. And I'm not going to do it by the main freeze and thaw. There's an icon right next to the freeze and thaw sun that is a sun on top of a little square. That's the one. See how it says freeze or thaw in current viewport? I'm going to click on that, and it's going to freeze that line in the current viewport. It didn't turn it off in all the viewports, right? Still on here, but it's not on in this south view anymore. So I'll do that for each elevation. I'll turn off topography. I'll double click here. And again, I'll turn off topography. I'll double click here. And I'll turn off topography. And so now I don't have that showing anymore. Okay, so if I went to print and I went to preview, we'd now see that I don't have those topo lines running through my elevations, right? And overall, my layout's starting to shape up a little bit. So now it's a matter of thinking through how we really want these organized. And so I've just dropped the elevations wherever they fell when I was doing them on the particular page. Now, in reality, it's usually a good idea. Let me take this one for a second, and I'm just going to move it over to the side. Generally, the south elevation is going to correspond nicely with the floor plan. So whatever view goes below the floor plan is generally associated with it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move, and I could use the move tool here, this object from that corner to right here to that corner so that they're in line. And then I'm going to go ahead and move this same object down so that it's below that viewport. So now these are nicely in line. Maybe I'll move this up a little bit higher. About like that. Then I'll take this object here, and I'll go ahead and I'll move it, but I want to make sure that this height matches up with this height. So I'm trying to do a general organization here. Oh, come on. All right, we'll move it over there, and then I'll move it back. Right? And so now this height matches up with that height. As I start to stack these up, it would be nice if they were reasonably in line. And so we'll move this over a bit. And I have no idea why my snapping is not working today. But what else is new, right? Do that. Move that up a bit. And then we'll move this last one back up over the top. There. Move this up a little bit more. Like that. Okay? So now if I were to look at this, and again I can just go to print or plot and then click on preview, we can see a live preview of what it looks like. I don't really like that I've got this little tiny piece of topography up there, so I'm going to cut that off by adjusting the viewport. So I'll come back right here and we'll pull this a little bit tighter. About like that. And maybe I'll pull this up a little bit more too. We can pull this over. Again, it's about what it looks like. And I'll come back and I'll print and then preview. And now I have a fairly good layout established of these particular pieces. Maybe the spacing's a little bit off. Maybe I need to move this one down a little bit. Let's take this one and we'll move it down. About like that. And so once I have this established, we're going to go ahead and make a PDF of it. And what you're going to be posting today is the PDF of this particular layout. So you're not going to get a good live preview. You could also go back in the interest of making your post look nice, and you could switch the printer to be a publish to web JPEG and then scale the fit so that you could see your layout. But again, all I really care about is the PDF because ultimately that's what you're going to start creating at this point. So once you have this set up and you've got your 4 views, right, you're going to plot this and you're going to print it. Next class, on Wednesday, we're going to take this into Adobe Illustrator. We're going to do some collaging over it. We're going to do maybe some diagramming over it. We'll color in some of the windows. You'll get an idea of how you can use Illustrator to collage over what you've drawn in AutoCAD. Okay? But for right now, right, what I'm interested in is getting this layout with the views set up. If you finish the views, right, or if you don't have all of your elevations yet, that now would be the time to catch up and have all your elevations, okay, to ultimately get this. Next class, we'll talk about getting title block. We'll talk about getting everything kind of organized and ready for your assignment 105. We will also talk about doing the plots here and how the plotters work so that you can get that experience of plotting as well. Okay, so we're building those little steps, but at this point, you should be getting kind of close to having your assignment 105 done. Are there any questions? No? I think everything got a lot easier because we don't have to use the MV setup anymore. Just rotating the viewports is a whole lot easier. So we're making progress. Okay? So I'm looking for this. I'm looking for no borders. Right? Make sure all of your viewport borders are on a non-printing layer. That's important. And then you'll go ahead and post the PDF by the end of class today.